Good morning, colleagues. My name is Kosietu from the Research Capacity Development Unit at the Postgraduate School. Firstly, I would like to welcome and thank to all our participants for joining today's session. Also to thank our facilitator for today, Dr. Lorenzo David. Please note that this workshop is being recorded and the recording as well as the presentation will be shared to your respective module communities, which is the supervisor community and the postdoctoral community. Firstly, I would like to go with some few housekeeping rules. The workshop is recorded as I've mentioned. And if you do have a question, colleagues, I will enable all your mics during the sessions. You are more than welcome to raise a hand or just type your question in the chat box. Firstly, I would like to go over Dr. Lorenzo's bio. Dr. Lorenzo David is currently a coordinator at the Research Capacity Development Unit, Postgraduate School, University of Johannesburg. He was recently awarded a PhD in biochemistry for his assessment of transferrin triggered gold, palladium, and gold palladium bimetallic nanoparticles and their potential for anti-cancer drug delivery at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. By adapting a holistic approach to education, Dr. Lorenzo hopes to inspire students to achieve personal and academic success, which with a hands-on and learner-centric approach to value-based learning. Colleagues, that was Dr. Lorenzo's bio. Please note that I will be also sharing a feedback evaluation link on the chat. We urge you colleagues to fill in that feedback evaluation that help us in planning more or organizing a workshop of this kind and to find out if the workshop that we are offering are beneficial to you and also to give feedback to our facilitators. Without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Dr. Lorenzo. Dr. Lorenzo, you may start sharing your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nkosi. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning once again to all colleagues. I hope you're all well. If you'll just give me a minute to put up my presentation. And if I can get a thumbs up from anyone if you're able to see my screen. So I see that I'm not able to see any hands up. So can I just say, please, throughout the presentation, if there's anything you would like to say, I encourage discussion. So please feel free to unmute your mic and you can interrupt me at any point. I'd like to try and make this workshop as interactive as possible because I believe that that's one way that we can learn from each other, and differing points of view are always of benefit, I feel. So yeah, without further ado, then I think we can begin with the workshop. So we titled this workshop Ethical Research Practices, Navigating Integrity and Responsibility in Academia. And we just thought towards this part of the year, it'll be an interesting topic to bring up for discussion, hopefully with you colleagues. So just to quickly go through some of the goals of the presentation, we'd like to, hopefully by the end of this presentation, understand the key ethical principles guiding academic research, as well as identify, ethical challenges that we commonly face in academic research. What are some of the ethical implications of technology, including AI and machine learning in academic research? Also to delve a bit into how has ethical principles evolved over the decades and what does that mean for our current view? How will we position ourselves in terms of research ethics moving forward, as well as to explore potential strategies to promote integrity and ethical responsibility in the context of research. So I'd just like to find out, can everyone hear me? Is everything fine before I go on to some of the content?
Yes, Doc, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Nkosi. Okay, so I thought it would be, let's see if this switches. There we go. Okay, so I thought it'd be important for us, or rather an interesting activity for us to start off by saying, what do we understand or how do we define research ethics? Like I said, if any of you would like to join in the conversation, I'd much prefer it to be a back and forth discussion, but I understand that certain people don't like necessarily talking in online meetings. But yeah, so I put the question out there to you all. How would you define research ethics? And like I said, if you would like to contribute, please feel free to unmute your mic. I'm just going to go through a definition that we've come up with, or rather that we've researched. So research ethics involves the principles and guidelines that govern how research is conducted. Importantly, it ensures that it is carried out with fairness, honesty, transparency, and accountability. These standards are put in place to protect the rights of participants and safeguard the well-being of the wider community. I feel that sometimes when we are going through our academic research, it can become a bit easy to forget that the end goal of all academic research should be the betterment of society, the betterment of our country, and the betterment of people globally. So with that in mind, there are certain rules and regulations and frameworks which have been put in place to ensure that these targets are met. And that's where research ethics comes into this, because if we do not have a framework against which to base our actions, then obviously everything becomes very objective, and that can lead to issues later on, as we'll discuss later on in the presentation. So when we're dealing with research ethics, it's important for us to identify what are some of the core elements related to research ethics. Like we've mentioned previously, it should be honesty in our research, respect for the participants. This is especially true when we're dealing with human participants or even animals. There needs to be a level of respect that is afforded to these individuals. Transparency in our research. All data should be made available when requested, and obviously there should be nothing that is hidden to skew results or skew opinion in a particular direction. There should be accountability in terms of the research that we are carrying out. And as always, there should be fairness. So these are the core elements that research ethics is centered around, and all research that we undergo should align in one way or another with these core values. So just as a disclaimer, there are quite a bit of slides on this presentation, but I promise you it's not going to be, hopefully it's not going to be too boring. What we're trying to do is just provide some feedback, and these will be available for you later on if you want to read through the presentation and unpack it a bit more. So just to quickly review, what are some of the ethical guidelines and frameworks within South Africa as well as globally? What governs our actions as researchers? So nationally within South Africa, we have the National Health Research Ethics Council, and it's a statutory body that provides ethical oversights of all health-related research within South Africa. Now, this body sets out guidelines for research involving human participants, and it ensures adherence to ethical standards. When we go on and move internationally, which obviously South Africa still subscribes to, we have the Declaration of Helsinki, which was originally came up in 1964, which provides international guidelines on research ethics for medical and clinical trials, which, as we stated, are already followed in South Africa, as well as the Belmont Report in 1978. Now, these provide principles for conducting research with human subjects, emphasizing respect for persons, as well as justice and how it is of benefit to the participants. Now, obviously, there are multiple guidelines that we can find online, and different institutions will have their own unique, I wouldn't say interpretation, but they will also have their unique guidelines, which they employees will need to follow. But obviously, at the end of it, they all subscribe to the main guidelines and frameworks, which are widely accepted globally as well as nationally. When we look at the University of Johannesburg, specifically, we see there is a code for academic and research ethics. I've just put in the link in this presentation, and when the presentation is shared at a later date, you're welcome to actually visit the page and just familiarize yourself and refamiliarize yourself, I should say, with that. So again, this is just left on the screen for you to look at, but we'll just go through some of the points here. In terms of UJ, there is academic integrity is maintained through the following points, and we'll just pick out one or two. We're going to say compliance with the highest standards of academic research, to act with due diligence in choosing publishing mechanisms, including journals and conferences that reflect academic integrity, as well as uphold the reputation of the university. Now, I think this is very important because there was a presentation, I think, earlier this month with a Professor Rudy de Lange, and he was just highlighting the how to identify predatory journals, and it was a talk along those lines. And a point came up where he mentioned that certain individuals in his research, or certain organizations he has identified as being possibly aware of the journals in which they are submitting their research to, which are predatory, meaning that their end goal is ultimately financial, and there's a high likelihood of certain publications being published without proper peer review. But this obviously has alternative implications in terms of higher output in terms of your publishing, and obviously all the associated implications of that. So I think that in terms of academic integrity, there's a lot that goes into it. I think that UJ has got a very solid framework in terms of what it considers right and wrong, and this is continually evolving. And obviously, as our knowledge expands on a certain topic, or if there's new developments within the field, I'm sure there will be changes and additions to our academic integrity, the list of academic integrity. So we go on to some of the other points, and it says, academic integrity is maintained through not falsifying academic research through either manipulation, change, or omission of data, or results of research material, equipment, processes resulting in inaccurate representation of research. We also go on to say assigning authorship of research publications accurately and fairly with the due considerations of the provision of the UJ policy on authorship. So, like I said, I'm not going to go too much in detail here, just to make you aware that these are the list, or the academic integrity is maintained through the following main points as provisioned by UJ. So I'd like to have a bit of a discussion, if it's okay with you colleagues, discussing some of the implications of ignoring ethical research practices. And hopefully there will be some contributions, and hopefully from maybe some of your past experiences. But I think it'll be a benefit to all of us here today if there is some input from some of the colleagues. So I'll just bring up the first one. Some of the implications of ignoring ethical research practices can lead to erosion of public trust. Ignoring ethical standards can damage public confidence in research and institutions, thereby diminishing the credibility of the entire field. And an example that came to mind for me personally would be of views during the pandemic of research institutions. Now, I don't personally believe that there was any unethical research practices that were going on during the development of the vaccines. But if you listen to conversations that were happening at the time, there seemed to be a lot of mistrust in these pharmaceutical companies and so on and so forth, the research institutions that were developing these vaccines. And this can have a major impact, because I know personally of many people who refuse to take the vaccine. And obviously, at the end of the day, it's completely down to the individual's choice. But the reason as to why they chose not to take the vaccine was not based on fact or science, but it was based off public opinion. And that sometimes can have a negative effect. So by maintaining our ethical standards, right, we can maintain public trust and therefore obviously offer a better service to the public at large. So I'll just give a few seconds if there's anyone who would like to unmute themselves or any contributions at this point. Please feel free to jump in. I know no one likes awkward silences, but I'd just like to give everyone an opportunity to share any of their views as well. Okay, doesn't look like there's any takers at this point. So we'll move on to the next point, which would be harm to the participants. By failing to follow ethical guidelines, this can lead to exploitation, and we've seen this happen throughout history. Each of us may have certain points which actually come to mind. We have issues such as privacy violations or putting participants at unnecessary risk in order to test, we can say, certain treatments. There is the issue of compromised research integrity, where unethical practices such as falsifying data can distort results and undermine the value and reliability of the research. In addition, there are also legal and institutional consequences. Researchers may face legal action, academic penalties, or dismissal, harming their institution's reputation and funding opportunities. And the last point, which I feel is one of the most important, would be a negative impact on society. Like we've said previously, the goal of a university, or rather the way I see it, the goal of research at a university is there to enhance and better what society, the offerings made to society, be that in the medical sense, be that in terms of development, economic, or just educating the population. So by us being unethical in our research, this can lead to misguided policies, because obviously this research is taken up and considered by government in many cases, and can lead to decisions that can harm public well-being. So just from this short list of implications, we can understand that the importance of maintaining ethical research practices. It does not affect only an individual. It does not only affect a research group at a university in terms of funding, in terms of ratings. But if we look at the ultimate goal of all research, which is to improve the lives of people within the country and globally, this can have a negative impact. And therefore, we feel that it is important for us to discuss issues such as this here, because many of us are involved with training, or we interact with students, and they are the next generation. They are the next generation of leaders. They're going to be obviously in positions of power in the future. And if we can instill certain values and principles as outlined by UJ and as outlined by many of the academic institutions, we will be doing a great service to the future, and will be basically helping ourselves by creating this culture of integrity, shall we say. So it goes on to a section that I'd like to discuss, which would be, what are some of the ethical implications and what are your views of technology, including, we can say, artificial intelligence within academic research? So once again, if you have any contributions, please feel free to add it to the chat if you don't feel comfortable speaking, and Mr. Nkosi will actually bring those questions to my attention. But yeah, what are some of the ethical implications we can think of with regards to the use of AI in academic research? So when we look at, obviously AI is a hot topic at the moment, and there's so many applications and implications that we can discover that is being used for AI. But we need to look at this from a holistic point of view, meaning that what are some of the pros and what are some of the cons associated with the use of this technology within academic research. Sorry, I'm just having an issue with my slides actually freezing. Just going to go to the next build. Okay. So we can discuss what are some of the pros right? Because obviously this is a very powerful tool which can be used to assist research in many ways. So we got enhanced data analysis, be it of large data sets, be it of coming up with summaries for certain papers or providing frameworks to which we can develop questionnaires. There's a lot of positives that can be that AI actually contains. Increased efficiency is another one. Like we said, it has the ability to perform in detail searches according to certain criteria, which can actually make the most of the time that we have available in the day, and as well as automation of repetitive tasks. So these are just obviously three uh, three pros of the many pros that exist. And I'm sure that many of you can think of hundreds more, if not of some of the pros of using AI in academic research. However, we need to always consider the fact that with every new technological advance, there is the possibility of this being used unethically and it being used to perform a job instead of supporting a person in the role of performing their job. Because at the end of this day, this AI should not be seen as a tool that it will do my job for me, but rather this is a powerful tool that will help me or enhance my abilities to be more efficient in the role that I have currently, to be able to analyze data maybe in a way that I am unable to, or provide alternative insights to add to your research currently. So, what are some of the concerns when it comes to the use of AI in academic research? And this is something that I've come across in the past. So these are just a few of the examples again that we've highlighted. So we can say ethical use of AI generated content in terms of research papers, review articles, as well as assignments. Now, the assignments is obviously specific more to uh, students or other students that I've had some interaction with at other universities, as well as in some of the classes that we've taught. And what do we notice by this? Again, it's based on our perception of the tool. If we see this as being sort of a tool to actually write out papers for us, in certain cases, write out even our theses and so on and so forth, that is obviously an unethical use of it. It will have a negative impact on scientific knowledge because we are limiting our own exposure to this information, and over reliance on AI can limit diversity of ideas as well as creativity in academic research. From my opinion, I believe that one of the main goals of a university or other university or higher education is to train your brain in a way to think analytically and to look at situations and come up with solutions to problems that may not be apparent to us at first. So if we look at obviously the thinking capability of someone in a higher degree to someone in the school level, obviously there's going to be a major difference there. And higher education allows us to train our brains to think in a specific way. But with these tools that are now becoming more readily accessible, and obviously lots of them are free as well, there is the chance that this is going to limit our thinking ability, for lack of a better word. Highlighting the importance that there needs to be responsible use of these tools. Now, from what I've seen and what I believe, by just coming up with a framework and saying, you know what, you should not use these tools because we say so, is not really going to change the minds of the next generation or change the minds of people just entering university. At the end of the day, they are registered for certain degrees. There's a lot of pressure put on them that you know what, we need to get this degree because for A, B, and C, we want a better future, maybe so on and so forth, certain reasons. But I think that when it comes to ethics or research ethics, instead of having and coming up with a list of rules in order for people to follow, it would be better for us to understand the implications of us not following these rules, or the implications of us not applying ourselves in certain situations, because obviously, ultimately, we are limiting ourselves in terms of the future. AI is a powerful tool. However, we also know that it is just a tool. It cannot think like a human can. It can try and replicate it in certain ways, but it cannot replicate exactly how a human thinks and analyzes a specific problem. So I'd just like to stop for a few seconds. Are there any questions at this point or any contributions? Be happy to take any questions at this point. Okay, so I don't think there's anything at this point. So we can go on to a question that I've been thinking about is that how has ethical principles in research evolved over the decades? And I think this is important for us to understand that ethics, the core values of ethics remains the same. For example, do good, be transparent in your research, do not falsify data. These things are not going to change. However, our perceptions on certain issues, such as, let's just say, studies involving humans, if we look back from the early 20th century versus today, we notice that, there is a huge difference in how we view ethics, especially involving research and animals. We've read some stories over in the early 20th century where if you wanted to perform an experiment on an animal, you would not need any ethical clearance. You could perform any experiment you wanted to, regardless if others may have seen it as cruel or not, because there were no laws in place or no frameworks or guidelines that were strong enough to govern these sorts of studies. So consider laws and guidelines which existed in the previous centuries, and what was considered ethical decades ago may not be seen in the same light today. So you may be asking, what is the point of bringing this up? The point that I want us to bring up is that with new information, with new tools that are available to us, research ethics cannot remain static. It needs to be evolving with obviously the adapting academic landscape as well. So as we've stated previously in an example, if we look at studies involving humans and animals of, let's say, the early 1900s compared to today, there would be a vast difference. Informed consent may not be a one that is very important back then, but obviously now, in terms of all of the rules and regulations that we have, they are highlighted as being highly important. So with that, we also need to continually be evaluating our ethical principles in terms of the current landscape and trying to always align it according to the frameworks which have been put in place by research institutes, organizations, nationally as well as globally. So an example that I thought that was very interesting was an example of someone called Henrietta Lacks. And Henrietta Lacks was an African-American woman whose cells were taken without her consent in 1951. So basically, she went to the doctor. She was diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor actually did an extraction of some of her cells. And it turns out that these cells were immortal, meaning that obviously they were not going to die, and it led to one of the most significant and controversial cases in medical ethics and research history. So what had happened was these cells were taken from this participant without her consent, without her knowledge, shall we say, that it's going to be used for research purposes. These cells were thereafter grown in labs, and obviously companies or a company began selling these and making insane profits off of these cells. And the crazy thing is that these cells are still in use today, and they form the foundation of many cell-based studies, especially dealing with cancer. So back then in 1951, there were not strong ethics guiding that, is this ethical for us to take these cells of this person and to monetize it for our own personal gain? But obviously today, there are much more stringent laws in place that govern whether this will be possible or not. The sad reality was that Henrietta Lacks passed away from cancer. I think it was a short time after these cells were taken. And while the companies who had extracted and obviously tried to monetize these cells made huge profits of these cells, none of the money was actually passed on to Henrietta Lacks or her family. And I think there was a huge legal battle that went on, and up until recently, there was only some closure on it where there was some sort of settlement that was reached. So this hopefully gets us thinking that what we see today as being ethical, in 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, we may have a different view of it. So we need to be continually analyzing and critically analyzing our own thoughts, and obviously in terms of what we consider to be ethical, and always striving towards improving in these areas. So the next part of the workshop, or rather this discussion, deals with what are some of the challenges in academic research. And I'm sure each of you would have numerous examples of some of the challenges that you faced. We're just going to go through a few. One of the most frequent challenges that I have personally come across in academic research would be that of plagiarism. Obviously, we know it is a significant challenge, especially among students and sometimes even beyond, although in my personal opinion, quite rarely, but that's just an opinion of mine. This is sometimes compounded by the pressure to publish in high impact journals, or rather in order to secure funding. But the question arises, if we are placed in a high pressure situation where we need to deliver a piece of work, we need to publish a paper, and this is going to have long-standing effects on whether I get my degree or not, whether I publish in this high impact factor journal, is there any way for us to justify plagiarism? And the answer simply is no. Plagiarism in no way, shape, or form can ever be justified. But these are some of the challenges that we need to address, especially with new incoming students, where we need to explain to them that we need to think about the situation in the long term. Yes, by plagiarizing a particular assignment, there is a chance that you may not get caught. But if you do get caught, there's obviously repercussions in terms of the university getting kicked out, as well as preventing yourself from going through the learning process. Because ultimately, that's what we are here for, to learn how to think critically, to analyze information, and obviously to be efficient in our roles once we leave the university. If we are skipping these important steps, obviously it's going to lead to us failing later down the line because we have not developed the skills necessary to reach these particular targets or goals. So what is the ethical concern with plagiarism? Plagiarism undermines the trust in academic work, as well as violates the principles of intellectual honesty by me saying that I came up with an idea which was actually developed by my colleague. That is a prime example of plagiarism. And while it may theoretically help me to move up to the next level or whatever it may be, I still don't have within me the skills necessary to execute, shall we say, these plans or something to that extent. So how do we go about combating plagiarism? And I think this is where we should emphasize strict adherence to citation standards, the use of plagiarism detection tools, which obviously all universities are very familiar with, and I think it's absolutely fantastic, as well as institutional campaigns to educate researchers and students, I forgot to add students in there, about the consequences of plagiarism. At the end of the day, we are all trying to work towards a common goal. And obviously in this context, that's making and keeping UJ as one of the premier universities in the country as well as globally. So how can we contribute towards this is by creating shall we say, a mentality of integrity, a culture of integrity, so that all students who graduate from these doors and from this very impressive institution carry with them the same value system moving forward. If I can just skip over to the next one. There we go. Some of the challenges that we've also come across in research and through our journey would be data falsification and fabrication. I just want to put a disclaimer out there that this workshop and these slides were not based off any particular university, or it's just basically some of the common issues and challenges that we've come across throughout our research journeys. And so data falsification and fabrication. So often we understand that in high pressure situation, researchers are under pressure to publish, and there is always the possibility that they may engage in data manipulation or selective reporting of our results. And this is not only limited to a university, but this can be obviously extended out to research institutions and all healthcare, research institutions. This is particularly prevalent in highly competitive fields where career development depends on publications as well as grants. So that's pretty straightforward, right? What we need to kind of instill in the next generation, also continually remind ourselves of, is that any of these challenges that we're going to go through, there is never a justification for them. I know that we all understand that, but we need to try and come up with ways in which we can pass this on to the next generation of students, as well as anyone that we interact with. One of the ethical concerns dealing in data falsification and fabrication would be it will lead to invalid results, which can harm the academic community, firstly, as well as society. So if we move back to the example of the COVID vaccines, if whichever company, or rather say the primary company that was involved in research, actually falsified some of their data and said, you know what, it is safe. If in a hypothetical situation, they had done that, and laws were passed and the vaccines were allowed to be produced and distributed to people, what could the effect have been? It could have been detrimental. Many millions of people could have lost their lives. So in terms of data falsification and fabrication, it moves just beyond our research paper. It moves just beyond our grant application. And we need to always think, what is going to be the downstream effect if this research, which has been, if it has ever been falsified or polished or fabricated, what is the effect it can have on society? And I think that that is a good marker to have in terms of guiding us in some of the challenges, ethical challenges in academic research. How is it going to affect the next person? How is it going to affect my neighbor? How is it going to affect my family, if you want to bring it in that close? So how do we go about combating these issues? Through implementation of rigorous data management procedures, and I've come across many labs which are fantastic in the way in which they store their data and make it available for any sort of auditing systems, as well as maintaining comprehensive and accurate records. When many of us have gone through our PhDs, you would have had your lab book, which would probably have been the most important thing in terms of your research at the time, where every little note, every alteration and change you would have maintained in there. So obviously, if you come back a year later, 6 months, whatever it may be, you can replicate that experiment to the exact point and get the same data over and over again. So by instilling into the next generation that it is important for us to always maintain comprehensive and accurate records and to store the data safely, we can obviously protect ourselves against any accusations of data falsification and fabrication, because obviously we know there's always a chance of that happening. Something that I thought was quite interesting would be misleading authorship. And misleading authorship can occur in collaborative research, and there is sometimes where some academics may take credit for research they did not directly contribute to, or where some researchers may be excluded from authorship despite significant contributions, and this can be due to their standing or maybe the level of study that they are in. One of the ethical concerns of this is misleading authorship practices undermine trust and fairness within the research community. I mean, if we think about it from a personal point of view, if we have spent countless sleepless nights working in a particular paper and working within the lab, only for our name to be omitted from the paper, how would that make you feel? These are some of the challenges which need to be addressed in terms of academia. And obviously, this is on a global scale. It's not just located to research groups in South Africa. So how do we go about combating these issues? Clear authorship agreements from the start of the project are always a good thing. Remember, we always are encouraged to have everything down in writing. Follow the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors' criteria for authorship, and we're going to go through that in the next slide, as well as transparent discussions about roles and contributions. By following this sort of blueprint, we can understand and ensure that at the end of the process, when the paper is being published, or the journal article, or the book chapter, whatever it may be, all contributors have been acknowledged and everyone is happy, obviously, at the end of it. So I thought it'd be important for us to go through, just interesting for us to go through the ICJME criteria for authorship. The ICJME recommends that an author should meet all 4 of the following criteria. And once we go through it, you'll understand that, you know what, sometimes this can also lead to some issues. So substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data for the work. The next point would be they would have to be involved in drafting of the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content. The third point would be they would have to have final approval of the version to be published. We'll have to have a say in it. And fourthly, there would be an agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work, ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. So for many of us who've obviously, for many of us who've actually been through the process of publication, it's not an easy one. Sometimes you get review comments which don't necessarily make sense. But in order for my name to appear on a journal article, I need to have met all 4 of these criteria according to the ICJME criteria for authorship. Sometimes this can cause issues because there may be an individual who's involved in the collection of the data, the analysis, the write-up, but they may not meet one of the criteria, for example, final approval of the version to be published. So if it's an honors student who was, this was part of his study and his or her results is going to be published, they may be involved in 3 of the 4 steps, shall we say, or criteria, and maybe not a final one. But does that mean that they should not be granted authorship for it? Personal opinion, I believe that if you are involved in the conceptualization, design, implementation, analysis, and write-up, if you meet those criteria according to obviously what we see on the screen as well, you should be listed as an author. If your contributions are obviously less in terms of, okay, fine, I send off my paper and ask it to be reviewed by a colleague, where they will look for grammatical errors and maybe provide some suggestions in terms of formatting, etc. Is that sufficient criteria for the name to appear on the paper? According to this criteria, the ICJME, it is not. So, yeah. Another challenge that we go across in academic research would be that of conflict of interest. If we look at within South Africa specifically, researchers often work in collaboration with industry, stakeholders, government bodies, as well as non-governmental organizations. What becomes an issue here is that financial and personal interests can create conflicts of interest, especially when research outcomes may benefit certain stakeholders. So obviously, we understand there's plans and processes in place to avoid such things from happening, but how do we go about combating this? And what are some of the concerns when it comes to conflict of interest? So conflicts of interest may bias the design and conduct, basically the reporting of the research. So it may, if there is financial gain by a particular individual or institution, there is always the possibility that the research and results may be skewed in a particular direction, be it through falsification of your data, obviously omission of certain key data, which will limit their approval, shall we say, in terms of medication, etc. So how do we go about combating this issue. Just to make it known, there are various and several guidelines which institutions have to follow. And some of the key points would be disclose potential conflicts of interest in research publications, grant applications, as well as ethics review boards. Universities and research bodies require regular conflict of interest declaration from researchers, especially if there is collaboration between particular research groups and industry, if there's funding and so on and so forth. So we go on to maintaining research integrity and accountability in academia. How do we maintain accuracy and transparency in terms of our research in academia? For many of us will notice there's a growing emphasis on open access publications and data sharing within South Africa as part of the push towards open science. One of the ethical concerns is always ensuring that research results are not manipulated for personal or institutional gain. And a consideration to combat the issue would be to always promote transparency by sharing your data sets. And I will come back to this point, methodologies and research protocols, engage in open peer review processes, and encourage replication of studies to validate our findings. So with regards to the first couple of points in terms of sharing your data sets, methodologies, and research protocols, we understand that certain times, certain research methodologies may be undergoing patents, and obviously that they may not be able to be shared in its entirety. But what we're trying to maintain here is that transparency of your work, transparency of what data can be made available, as well as one of the points of publishing a research paper is that if you publish a research paper dealing on whatever field it may be, so I'm from science, so I'll look for an example from science. If you publish a research paper on synthesizing a new nanoparticle and you publish in a very high impact factor journal, and it is absolutely incredible the work that you've done, I should be able to, and this is how it should be, I should be able to take that paper, follow the steps that you have followed exactly under the exact conditions, and replicate your results towards a reasonable degree. Obviously, we understand that sometimes when it comes to scientific enterprise, that you may not be able to get exactly the same results, but they should fall within the same ballpark. If I'm telling you that I'm able to synthesize a nanoparticle out of gold using this method, that is of a certain shape, size, and has a certain charge to it, you should, if you are going to go and replicate this experiment, you should be able to replicate it within a certain degree of those criteria, shall we say. At this point, again, I'm going to ask, is there anyone that has any questions, concerns, or anything you'd like to discuss? Please feel free to raise your hand or even just unmute your mic, and you are welcome to speak on anything that we've discussed so far. Okay, I don't see any hands or anything in the chat box, so we're just going to move forward. So continuing on this topic, in order for us to maintain research integrity and accountability in academia, peer review and publication is one way of doing this. If we look within the context of South Africa, we understand the peer review process is evolving with increasing participation in international journals. And obviously this has been going on for many, many years, as well as collaboration with global researchers. However, there can be challenges with unethical review practices, such as bias or conflicts of interest, and the emergence of predatory journals. When we speak about ethical review practices, could be if myself and a colleague if I am submitting a journal to which my colleague is an editor on, and I pass on a message to them unofficially, you know what, I'm going to be submitting my paper to this journal, can you just approve it? That is an unethical review practice. So obviously it undermines academic inquiry. It undermines the point of us actually peer reviewing and submitting a journal for publication. And obviously that is going to affect the academic integrity, not only of the institution, but of ourselves as well. The emergence of predatory journals, I think, is quite an interesting one. When I had just published, I literally had just attended a conference, and you know, in the conference proceedings, obviously they publish your abstract within a couple of weeks. I think it was maybe less than a couple of weeks. I got quite a few emails from journals actually being like, oh, you know, I wasn't even a doctor at the time. They'll just be like doctor or professor or whatever it is, which just goes to show you they don't even know who you are. They're just copying and pasting your name, and they'll be like, we would be so appreciative or something if you would consider publishing in our journal, and so on and so forth. And as someone still at that time it was in my master's or early PhD, you can get taken away by this and not understand that these are actually, many cases, these are actually predatory journals which do not follow the same peer review process as many of the more established journals. So I think it's important for us to be able to share this information in terms of alerting, especially young academics, to the fact that not all journals are created equally, and not all journals follow the same method in terms of peer review, which is one of the cornerstones of obviously a publication, and which adds integrity to us publishing our papers. So what is some of the ethical concerns in terms of peer review and publication? We need to ensure fair, unbiased, and objective peer review. And as frustrating as this can be sometimes, because like I mentioned previously, you may have a certain reviewer who asks questions which may not completely make sense, but at the end of the day, that is part of the academic process. And at the end of the day, it all is a journey that we need to enjoy. Because at the end of it, we are in academia because we enjoy working in academia. We enjoy academic inquiry. We enjoy maybe not writing up papers. Not everyone enjoys writing up papers, but getting our research out there. And in order for us to protect that which we love, we need to maintain research integrity. And as always, pass that on to the next generation. And it may not always be through us actively having discussions with those, but the way in which we carry ourselves in an academic environment in terms of our own analysis, in terms of our research, we must keep in mind that people are always watching, especially students. They're always watching how we conduct ourselves in a research environment. And the way in which we conduct ourselves helps guide the next generation. So what is a consideration to combat this issue? And many of these are already obviously being used. So use blind peer review systems. So basically just reviewing a paper according to a submission number instead of a name or surname. Always important to disclose conflicts of interest. And these are obviously always requested when you are submitting a paper, and as well as follow ethical guidelines for reviewers and editors. We can go on quickly, and I'm almost at the end of the presentation. So yeah, we're just going to speak quickly about accountability for misconduct. Globally, institutions have recently been strengthening their systems for investigating research misconduct. However, there are still some instances where misconduct goes unreported due to fear of reputational damage. One of the ethical concerns is that if we allow this to go on and failure to address unethical behavior, it will undermine the integrity of research within the country. I have to be very careful in how I say this, but from some of the workshops that I've attended previously, there seems to be a notion that research from certain countries that are out of shall we say, Europe, America, certain parts of Asia, if research comes from countries out of these regions, that it's a bit more questionable. Firstly, I don't believe in this because I think there's a lot of impactful and amazing research that is being done by many institutes around the world. especially in South Africa. So in order for us to protect our integrity and to let the rest of the world see what we know is present within our country, we need to obviously be accountable and obviously address any unethical behavior, because at the end of the day, if there's any unethical behavior that occurs within a certain institution, say within a country, the entire country unfortunately gets painted with the same brush. So it's important for us to obviously keep and hold ourselves to these high ethical standards. One of the considerations to combat the issue would be to establish clear institutional policies for investigating allegations of research misconduct and ensure that whistleblower protection is in place. I'm happy to say, and I'm sure that all of you know this already, is that the University of Johannesburg has these policies and procedures in place. Sorry, apologies for the spelling error. Has these policies in place, and I think that it is a very powerful and useful tool to helping us maintain academic integrity within the institution. So, last 2 slides before we end off this presentation would be, what are some of the best practices for ethical research within South Africa? So we'll quickly go through the list. Number 1 would be adhere to local and international guidelines, and that's something that universities in South Africa already do. Familiarize yourself with both the South African and international ethical standards. Ensure compliance with the National Health Research Ethics Council guidelines and other local relevant frameworks. A point that I'd like to mention once again and highlight would be to promote a culture of integrity. We need to lead by example in maintaining ethical research practices, encouraging all those around us, especially our students, to prioritize ethics in their research, to highlight the fact that it is okay for you, and I'm going to be careful how I say this, but it is okay for you to fail if you're doing it on your own strength, because through failure is where we learn to be better. We need to remember that the goal of this is not just us reaching the destination, but it's the journey that we take along academic research that helps us to grow and develop and become better. So failing at something does not make you a failure. You can always learn things from your failure. So by passing on this knowledge to the next generation, hopefully we can continue this high degree of ethical research within South Africa. And the last point that I'd like to make is some of the best practices for ethical research within South Africa would be transparency and open science. You know, there's a push, and I hope that we embrace the principles of open science by sharing data and results transparently, advocate for reproducibility and public access to research findings, because obviously these are going to add to many of the points that we've mentioned previously. So yeah, so with that, I would like to thank you all for listening to this short presentation. And if you have any questions or contributions, please feel free to just unmute your mic and yeah, feel free to talk. I see there's some hands raised. I think it was Atia that was first, if I'm not mistaken. Please, you can go ahead and speak.
Okay, thank you for the insightful presentation. I want to know, what are the various ways of storing data so that the international community can get your data? I'm still, at times, I'm not clear how we share data in various forms.
Okay, so as far as my understanding would be, you would back up your data and obviously you can store it on various devices, OneDrive, you can create hard copies, whatever it is. And what we're saying here is not taking your data and openly just disseminating it on the internet. What you do is you have the data present. If there are any queries that come in terms of the validity of your results, you can always back it up with your data. Or if someone requests and wants to do a collaboration with you, you are able to thereafter share your data with them. Does that answer your question? Or is there still, have I not answered the question?
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much.
Atia, I see your hand is up. Saying your name correctly.
Hi, Doc. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation as well. I just have a question about accessibility of the info you just gave us, and specifically for maybe undergraduate students. So I
Yes.
consider myself like a baby academic or a junior academic. I'm in my
Yes.
second year PhD. And what I found was I only actually started learning a lot more about ethics,
Yes.
obviously in my master's. But
Yes.
I'm also only learning a lot more now because now's the time where we're starting to publish and stuff like that.
Yes. Mhm.
But I wonder if students were given this information, including myself, a lot earlier, we would
Yeah.
then be a lot more mindful about how we conduct research, the kind of research we gather ourselves, the journals we use, stuff like that.
Yeah. I think it's a very good point. And actually, what we can do is speak to the portfolio that deals with postgraduate students and try and maybe come up with a few workshops that's targeted maybe towards the honors, masters, and that level of study. So like you're saying, we're providing them with information early on. So it's not something they have to learn, but it's something they're exposed to at a younger age. And therefore that becomes second nature to them. So yeah, if you please feel free to reach out to us if you would like to have any suggestions. And yeah, we'd be more than happy to hopefully come up with a series of workshop targeted towards younger postgrads in terms of research ethics, because I do believe it is quite an important it's quite an important topic. And to be honest, I consider myself, I am quite a junior academic myself. I've only recently graduated with my PhD. So yeah, we're all learning. We're always learning from each other. And yeah, any contributions from any of the colleagues here would be greatly appreciated. So thank you, Atia. I appreciate your input. Okay, we have in the chat, so I'm just checking. So from Mr. Dion van der Merwe, it says, he says, good idea, early exposure. This can also be a counter approach to the current AI conversation. Yeah, no, I do agree with the fact that, okay, when many of us were in our undergrad, there was no AI as far as I can remember. Like I only become aware of it within the past couple of years, but I'm a bit slow in that regard there. But I think now when students are actually faced with the fact that, you know what, do I spend the whole night or the whole weekend working in a particular assignment when I can literally go into, ChatGPT and have it generated for me? We don't understand the implications of it later down the line. So I think it's very good that we try and pass on this information as much as possible to the next generation, because certain skills are important to survive in academia. And like I said, I'm still a junior in academia myself, but yeah, we're always hoping to learn. Okay, we've got another message from Atia. It says, we're really nice to have this ethics presentation as a compulsory course or series of workshops for all junior researchers. I don't know if we'll be able to make it compulsory, but what we can say is that if many of you, I'm sure you are aware of the Research Capacity Development Unit and what we aim to do and how we aim to empower postgrads in any way that we can. So we will definitely seriously consider coming up with a series of workshops targeted specifically towards, shall we say, early researchers. And yeah, hopefully there will be some good impact to the students, because to be honest, if I had known then a bit of what I've been exposed to now, I think it would have allowed me to develop certain areas much faster, as well as it would have been a great help. There's another hand up, Sibongile. Yeah, please unmute your mic. You can speak.
Good morning, everyone. So I have recently just started my master's degree, and I feel so overwhelmed when it comes to the ethical part of things. to the point that I'm kind of nervous and thinking to myself, is this whole journey going to be worth it? Because sometimes it feels as if there's too many delays, there's too many red tapes, there's too much gatekeeping. I'm not sure what's happening. So I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. I'm very happy that we had this session. It shed some light on a lot of things that I was concerned about, because I wasn't quite understanding the journey. So I don't know if maybe some of you who are further in the journey, or yourself, David, if you could just, give some clarity in terms of, okay, you know what, this is how it is, and don't expect any sunshine and roses.
Okay, so before I respond to that, I want to give colleagues, you guys a chance to respond to Sibongile if there's any advice you have, and then obviously I'll just come in with a little bit of input from my side as well. I always say in any class that I have as well, we always can learn from each other. So yeah, in this setting, I hope that we can do the same. So let's give it a few seconds, and then hopefully I'll be able to respond. Yeah. Are there any takers? Anyone with any advice? I think Atia, you can go ahead. You guys don't have to raise your hands. You please feel free to unmute and just speak. It's I'd like it to be a bit more informal, so go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I thought I would just share some of my advice, since I finished master's about 2 years ago, and now I'm in second year of PhD and lecturing. So I would say that and I know it's very cliche to say like you have to be passionate about it, but I think the deeper you get into research, because I really didn't think I would be doing a PhD, but there is this deep desire to create new knowledge. And for me, that's very exciting. So sometimes I'm like, I have to read so much, and you start questioning like, why am I reading all of this? Why am I writing all these essays when, AI can generate them? But I think it's that passion of being a critical thinker. And it's something that I tell my students as well when we have the conversations about AI. It's the fact that we as human beings can think so far beyond and that's something AI could never do. So for me, that gives me goosebumps to think that I'm actually creating something that, isn't a robot generated.
I think those are very good points. And Sibongile, if I can also add, in terms of what you're feeling right now, I've personally been there, where I felt very overwhelmed at the start of my master's and my PhD. Yeah, it is, well, from what I've experienced, it is normal, but I think you also have to have belief in yourself that, what, you've gotten up to this point. There's nothing limiting you from achieving this degree. Yes, there will be many setbacks, and that's part and parcel of the course for any higher degree, but you just take them one challenge at a time, I would say, and lean heavily on the experience of those around you. That's some advice that I will always give to anyone, is that if you're joining a research group, if you're joining a particular department, in whatever capacity it will be, lean heavily on your colleagues, because remember, they have been where you are now, and they would be able to provide you with the correct insight and advice on how to navigate those particular areas. So yeah, just continue to believe in yourself. Like Atia was saying, remind yourself constantly of the reason why you got into this area of research in the first place. And obviously that is going to drive you forward. And there will be times where you would feel like giving up, and there will be times where it feels like it's too much. But just understand that, what, I believe everyone is capable of achieving, whatever they set their minds out to, with the correct support. So you have the support system around you, just make use of it. And if you are ever in any need, if there's any way that the Research Capacity Development Unit can help you, may it be, and this goes to everyone, if there is a particular topic that you guys feel would be important for us to address, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will try our best to develop a workshop which hopefully assists you in that regard. So yeah, are there any more questions or Any more contributions? I think there was a hand up previously, but the hand has since been put down. So yes, Samson, you can go ahead.
Yeah, my contribution is that academic writing doesn't come overnight. So it's through practice that you'll be able to master all these things. But if you put all these ethics before you and you think you cannot achieve them, it becomes a barrier for you to develop. So just write. As you write, it develops gradually. And before you realize all the ethics, you just follow. Everybody started that way and we were able to pass through. Yeah.
That was very good advice. Thank you, Samson. Yeah, I think, at the start of any, be it your master's or your PhD, when you look at the amount of work that actually you still have to do, it can become overwhelming. So the advice that I would have to anyone who's starting out their master's or PhD would be literally take it one day at a time, because that's all that we have, shall we say, without getting too deep into that. But take it one day at a time, set a list of goals for you to achieve for the day, and just work towards that. Because if you look at the steps that's in front of you, the journey becomes much more manageable. And, feelings of being overwhelmed and so on and so forth basically doesn't take hold and stop you from achieving your ultimate goal. So, yeah. So thank you guys for the contributions. I'll leave it open for another minute. If there's anyone else that wants to speak or any contributions, you're more than welcome to unmute your mic. Yeah, I'll leave it for a minute. And then if not, then I think we'll be able to close the session.
Thank you, Dr. Lorenzo, and to colleagues. Colleagues, if you do have a question, just unmute your mic and ask a question. Just to go back to Atiya's question, in terms of offering such workshops at the beginning of the year, we usually do plan such workshops, and hopefully, or if I'm not mistaken, we do have recordings in the main community for masters and PhD postgraduate students. So if you are looking for previous workshop recording, you are more than welcome to go back to that community and access the recording from there. However, we are working on the 2025 plan for all the portfolios, so we will make sure that such workshops are provided in time, whereby they will align with your postgraduate journey. So I believe you will get help from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nkosi. Really appreciate your help. Colleagues, if I can just ask each of you to please fill out the feedback form that has been posted in the chat. It really helps us to improve our service, to see areas in which the facilitator can improve, obviously, as well as how we are actually running these workshops as well. So feedback is always welcome and always helps us to improve our service to you guys. So with that, I think from my side, I can close off. I'll just hand the floor back to Mr. Nkosi, who may have to have a few more things to say before we end the session. Thank you very much once again. I hope you all have a fantastic day.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lorenzo, once again, and to all colleagues for attending and taking your time. We do appreciate your time, and we do believe that this workshop was very helpful to you. And if you do have any questions regarding such workshops, you are more than welcome to email us on RCT inquiries, or if you are having trouble or problems in terms of accessing our previous recordings, so we will be able to assist you. To all the colleagues, once again, thank you. As Dr. Lorenzo has mentioned, we urge you colleagues to fill out the feedback evaluation to help us in planning or organizing workshop of this kind. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely day further. Thank you.